Whether it was due to neglect, weapons testing, or climate change, people have been ruining the Earth for millennia, creating some of the most dangerous places in the world to visit. Many of these were popular tourist spots with lots of activity, but are now ranked in the top 10 most dangerous places to visit in the world. In the past century, we have caused so much damage to the planet that just staying overnight in some of these places could be a death sentence. If you're wondering what's the most dangerous place on Earth, follow this top 10 documentary video and find out. Number 10. Anthrax Islands. If the entry title didn't immediately give this one away, you should avoid any place that is known as Anthrax Island. There are 3 such islands, spread across the planet. They were used by the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union to test biological weapons such as anthrax. But that wasn't the only deadly bug unleashed in these places. Gruinard Island, off the coast of Scotland, was used by the UK during World War II to test anthrax. It was deemed uninhabitable until the late 20th century, after decades of anthrax spore contamination. Vozrozhdeny Island was an island in the Aral Sea that was split between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. The Soviets used it in the early 1950s to test biological weapons. They planned on decontaminating the island, but the USSR fell before they could do so. Some areas have been cleaned up, but you would be ill-advised to dig up any soil. Finally, the United States government owns and operates the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, off the coast of New York. In a plan to sell the land, the government had to commission an environmental impact study to determine the levels of contamination. Plum Island was originally developed in the early 1950s by the U.S. Army Chemical Corps to use animal diseases to wage biological warfare. Number 9. The Korean DMZ. You might think that a demilitarized zone, DMZ, would be a safe place to go. The word demilitarized is a bit misleading, since it refers to a stretch of land between the borders of North Korea and South Korea, which could also be called a no-man's land. Within the 250-kilometer, 155 miles stretch of land, which is approximately 4 kilometers, 2.5 miles, wide, there exists the largest accumulation of anti-personnel landmines on the planet. Because of the DMZ, the United States refused to sign an international treaty banning the weapons, which kill and maim far more unfortunate civilians than are killed by soldiers on either side. Entering the DMZ is a risky venture for anyone. While incursions into each other's territory happen every now and again, few people ever safely enter or exit the border. Both military factions constantly patrol the border on each side, so crossing it is extremely difficult. If you did manage to find yourself in the DMZ, the odds of getting captured or arrested are slightly lower than the odds of stepping on something, hearing a metallic click, and losing your leg. Number 8. Gilman, Colorado. Gilman, Colorado, began as a mining town in 1886 during the Colorado Silver Boom. But it is considered a modern ghost town, thanks to the permanent evacuation in 1984, ordered by the Environmental Protection Agency. The town was abandoned due to contamination of the groundwater from poor mining practices that allowed for an abundance of zinc, lead, cadmium, arsenic, and sulfides, beginning in the early 20th century. While Gilman was never a large town, it did host a population of around 300 people, which fluctuated every so often. The town has been declared a Superfund site, which is a federal program identifying areas so contaminated with hazardous substances that they are no longer habitable and require cleanup. As it stands, the town looks much like it did when it was abandoned. Vandalism has destroyed every pane of glass, but the houses, bowling alley, and even personal automobiles remain abandoned in the ghost town. Number 7. Bikini Atoll. You may have heard of the Bikini Atoll atomic tests conducted in the 1950s, but you will never have a chance to visit there. The original inhabitants of the island have been exiled from their homeland for 71 years, thanks to the U.S. tests. On March 1, 1954, the U.S. tested the Bravo hydrogen bomb, a 15-megaton nuclear weapon that vaporized 3 islands, and was more than 1,000 times the magnitude of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The islands remain uninhabitable and deadly, due to consistent fallout. Beginning in 1946, the United States tested a total of 67 nuclear devices, on and around Bikini Atoll and the Marshall Islands. 23 of those detonations took place directly on, over, or under Bikini Atoll. Believe it or not, there are a few people who live on the island as caretakers. They regularly test the soil, and work on cleanup methods to reduce the radiative impact. Attempts have been made to return the original inhabitants and their descendants to the island, but all efforts have been stalled due to the abundance of strontium-90, which is not something humans should be around if they value their skeletons. It causes bone cancer, leukemia, and a host of nasty diseases. Number 6. Pryor, Oklahoma. Pryor, Oklahoma, is a great place to visit if you want lead poisoning. The modern ghost town was abandoned by order of the EPA, due to the abundance of unrestricted subsurface excavation throughout the town. An Army Corps of Engineers study found that 86% of the buildings were undermined, and could collapse at any time. Weak buildings weren't the only problem, though. A study in 1996 by the EPA found that 34% of the children in the town suffered from lead poisoning. At one time, Pryor was the economic hub of the entire region, due to the abundance of lead and zinc mining. The population was in excess of 20,000 at one time, with more than 14,000 miners working. But the years of unregulated digging and poor waste management left the town uninhabitable, and it was declared a Superfund site. There are large piles of toxic metal strewn about the town, which doesn't keep the groundwater very clean. After the government bought the land and evacuated the population, the place became a wasteland of dead earth. It didn't help that a tornado destroyed much of the town in 2008. The last resident died just a few years later. Number 5. Wyndham, Australia. It took a few years, but we eventually learned that asbestos is dangerous to humans. It causes mesothelioma, which is not only difficult to say, it's also deadly. So, asbestos has been cleaned up and removed wherever it has been found. In the 1960s, Wyndham Australia was the largest producer of blue asbestos on the continent. But by 2013, the town was closed due to the toxic levels of blue asbestos throughout the area. As the dangers of asbestos were becoming clear in the late 1970s, the government began phasing out the township. The town was becoming contaminated and dangerous to anyone who needed to breathe, so the phasing out seemed like a good idea. By 2015, the Australian government had removed the town from its services, essentially delegitimizing it so that it no longer existed. Some people held out until that time, but when the government no longer recognizes the place you live as being a real location, it's time to move somewhere else. 3 people may not have gotten that message, since they are still defying all logic and refusing to leave the town. Number 4. Centralia, Pennsylvania. The next time you are visiting Pennsylvania, steer clear of a small mining town named Centralia. The place has been on fire for 55 years, and could burn for another 250, if estimates are correct. Yes, you heard that correctly, and you would be wise to read the signs posted all over the place, that warn weary travelers of their probable deaths by asphyxiation, or by being swallowed by the ground, which is often ablaze. Centralia once hosted a modest population of 1,000 people, but it is now a modern-day ghost town, thanks to an underground inferno that is consuming tons of coal. The townspeople were able to suppress the fire above ground, but it raged underground and continues to smolder. Fissures open on the surface all the time, and spew sulfurous gases that are deadly to anyone and anything. There are 12 people still living there, as they refuse to leave, but they represent just 1% of the original population. Moving to Centralia is a death sentence for most people, and it should never be on a list of places to check out while driving through Pennsylvania. Number 3. Chernobyl Zone of Alienation, Ukraine. One of the worst nuclear disasters of all time occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in 1986. Thanks to a late-night safety test, the shut-off of emergency safety systems, and a preventable steam explosion and graphite fire, nuclear fallout precipitated over much of the western USSR, and parts of Europe. 31 people were killed directly by the radiation released from the accident, 28 of whom were firefighters and employees working to put out the fires and stop the radiation leak. Since the accident, an exclusion zone has been established extending 30 kilometers, 19 miles, in all directions. It has been estimated that the land will not be fully safe for human habitation for another 20,000 years. But despite the danger, some Ukrainians refuse to leave, and have remained within the exclusion zone. The workers who continue to build a sarcophagus around the remaining plant are only permitted to work for 5 hours a day for 1 month before being forced to take 15 days off. The site can be visited if the proper precautions are taken. But visiting is dangerous, and should only be done to learn more about the disaster. Number 2. The Aral Sea. The Aral Sea was once a large lake between the borders of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. But thanks to global climate change, the lake is ostensibly gone. To make what was already a horrific situation worse, the draining of the Aral Sea exposed Vozrozhdenia, an island where the Soviets conducted secret open-air bio-warfare experiments during the 1950s. Vozrozhdenia, once a storage house for anthrax spores, bubonic plague bacteria, and weaponized smallpox, became part of the surrounding landscape. The lake is now only 10% of its original size, and much of the loss has occurred in the past 30 years. The sea began shrinking due to a Soviet plan, in the 1960s, to reroute several of the rivers feeding it. But most of the water has evaporated thanks to the increase in global temperatures. The shrinking of the Aral Sea has been called one of the planet's worst environmental disasters. Although the area was once a prosperous fishing location that helped boost the economies of both border nations, it is now a dead zone. The area's once thriving fishing industry has been decimated, and the exposed lake beds contain a high concentration of crop-killing salt, as well as pesticides, industrial chemicals, and fertilizer runoff. These irritants swirl in the air during dust storms, causing tuberculosis, cancer, and lung disease among the tens of thousands of people living nearby. Number 1. Fukushima Exclusion Zone, Japan. Thanks to the Tohoku earthquake on March 11, 2011, a tsunami pummeled the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, resulting in 3 nuclear meltdowns. Although it may seem like an act of God type of disaster, an independent investigative team determined that the causes of the accident were foreseeable, and the plant operator had failed to meet basic safety requirements, resulting in the fallout. The Fukushima nuclear disaster is the most significant nuclear incident since we split the atom. Contaminated groundwater continued to seep through a frozen soil barrier that has been erected to protect the area from the fallout, and the environmental impact has been significant. Since the accident, there haven't been any directly related deaths, but estimates suggest that thousands of people may succumb to cancer as a result of the fallout over the next 3 to 4 decades. Due to all the contamination, the area within a 20-kilometer (12 miles) exclusion zone is currently off-limits, unless you are interested in acquiring severe radiation sickness. Check out our other videos, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.